Part 3 of extracts from a diary kept by the Reverend R. Burrows during HEKE'S War in the North in 1845. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Thursday, March 27th. Aroused early this morning by the sound of voices under my bedroom window. News had arrived that Heke had left for this place yesterday by the way of Pakaraka with some 300 men, and might be expected early, hence the confusion. My natives were all astir, and there was great excitement throughout the settlement. It was reported also that Waka, hearing that Heke was on his way to the Waimate, had returned to his old camping place with part of his men, went down to the place, but found the huts all empty. Afterwards learned that Waka, who had not gone further than Te Ahuahu, a village about 2 miles off, the night before, had returned early in the morning to the borders of the settlement, but finding that Heke was still at Pakaraka 6 miles away, had gone to Okaihau to push on the erection of his pa. Saturday, March 29th. Yesterday and today we have been tolerably quiet. Heke still in the neighbourhood of Pakaraka, apparently adding to his numbers before coming further inland. Rode out to Maui. Found some of Waka's men taking away food, etc., belonging to natives who were with Heke, whilst Broughton and Ruhe, the 2 chiefs of the district whom I have mentioned before as having met Heke here on his way to the bay, were sending their own hands to Waka's camp with food. At this place are the wives and children of the men who were at the plundering and burning of Kororareka, who are related to Waka's people. These were doing their best to keep their own kumaras, potatoes, etc., and generally succeeded in doing so. On my return home found a messenger from Pakaraka, who informed us that Heke intended passing through our station on his way to Maui, a settlement about 2 miles from Waka's present locality, where it is presumed he will erect a pa if allowed to do so by Waka. Sunday, March 30th. A most trying day. After morning service, the parents of the schoolgirls came to say they must take their children away, as Heke would be here in the morning, and fighting would probably take place between the 2 parties in or near the station. Our worst fears have therefore been realised. 1/2 of the children have gone. Some of them had become so attached to the school and their teachers that their parents had to use force to get them away. Thus an institution, from which we expected much in the future, has been broken up, at least for the present, and our hopes frustrated. Late in the evening, Ruhe came in from Te Ahuahu to beg me to join him early in the morning, and go towards Pakaraka to meet Heke, who, he informed me, was leaving at daylight for this place, and had declared his intention to strip Wihau and destroy his pa, because it had been reported to him that he had been talking against him at several meetings, and condemning his proceedings. This chief's settlement is about 1 mile from our station northward. Reluctant as I am to encounter Heke after the mischief he has done and the bloodshed he has caused, I agreed to Ruhe's proposal. Monday, March 31st. Sent away a native lad at daylight on horseback towards Pakaraka to watch the movements of the Heke party. About 8 o'clock the lad returned and reported that they were on their way about 2 miles from the settlement. I joined Ruhe shortly afterward, and we walked together about 1/2 mile on the road, where we met the whole force, numbering about 300 men. They had with them a bullock dray, drawn by 4 bullocks, which they had taken, without leave, I believe, from Archdeacon William's sons, to bring in a small gun, etc., which they had brought with them from Kororareka. Ruhe and I walked in silence before them until we arrived at the Waiare stream, when Heke called for a halt, and a camp was formed on the south bank, which was regarded as outside our immediate station. Preparations were speedily made for cooking. In the meantime Heke, who had waited some time for either Ruhe or me to speak, stood up, and after some friendly remark said, "I have heard that the object of you 2 in coming to meet me is to prevent my stripping Wihau. But I mean to do it, and burn his pa." He was allowed to finish what he had to say, when Ruhe replied, "What, Have you not made yourself enemies enough already by what you have done in the bay? Strip Wee Howe, burn his pa, but remember that by so doing you are adding to the number of your enemies. All Wee Howe's party have declared themselves neutral, but once interfere with them, and you will have them against you." I added a few words to what Ruhe had said, and the affair ended by some kumeras and potatoes, with 3 or 4 pigs being brought into the camp by Wee Howe's people. Heke, in the course of the day, made a long speech in reference to the interference of Waka. He said that his quarrel was not with him, and that his place was Hokianga, that he should not commence hostilities with him unless he came within his camp at Mawe, where, at the request of Hiratepuri, a chief of the place, who had been with him to the bay, they were intending to erect a pa. The whole party appeared tired out, and many of them slept during the afternoon. I kept watch over our fences, which reached nearly to the edge of the stream on the other side, to prevent their being taken for firewood. In the evening I reminded Heke that we had succeeded in inducing Waka to move out of the settlement with his men, and that I hoped he intended to move on. He replied, "You have done right in keeping the mission station tapu. Had you allowed Waka to occupy it, you would have rendered it noa, common ground, and it would have been destroyed. You will see in the morning what I will do." Mr. Puki arrived late from Kaitaya. Tuesday, April 1st. We went early over to Heke's camp, found them all packing up for a move, and in a very short time the whole body, numbering over 300, marched single file through the settlement, fully armed, and halted for breakfast about half a mile on the other side of our station. I found out afterwards that Heke had given orders overnight that no fires should be lighted for cooking food where they were encamped, so that the men might have no excuse for pulling down the fencing for firewood or otherwise interfering with any of the mission property. Our neighbours, the Clarks, by the side of whose premises Heke and his people halted for breakfast, did not fare so well, as the cooks made free with their fencing to prepare their food with. This morning Heke was joined by some 150 natives, who had come over from Whangaroa. Many of them are relatives of Heke's wife. About midday the whole force moved on to Mawe, without meeting any opposition from their enemy. Seeing now that Heke was determined to make preparations at Mawe to meet an attack from Waka, and that fighting between the two parties was inevitable, involving probably the whole district around in war, I rode down to the bay to advise with Archdeacon Williams as to what was best to be done with our families. Returned again late at night. Wednesday, April 2nd. As the Governor has sent HMS the North Star to the bay to take away any European families living in the neighbourhood who may wish to remove, and has given notice that he is about to blockade the port, we decided that Mrs. B, infant and nurse, should go to Auckland for a while. Mrs. E. Williams, who had still a few girls in our school, to Paihia. Mr. Davis, for whom a new house had been built at Kaikohe, had made up his mind to go thither, Mrs. Davis being quite willing to go with him. Thursday, April 3rd. A messenger from Broughton and Ruhe asking me to go out and see them, as they were both very anxious fighting should not take place between the two parties. These two chiefs are neutral, and have all along counselled the leaving of the matter with the Government. I had therefore to leave Mrs. B and party in other hands, to see them down to the Keri Keri, where they were to proceed in a boat to the vessel. Saw Broughton and Ruhe, who asked me to ride on to Okaihau, take a message from them, and use my own influence with Waka to stay hostilities until he should hear further from the Governor. In passing I saw Heke, who at first objected to my proceeding further, as he said some of his men had gone out towards Waka's camp to bring in food from a plantation which belonged to them, and they might be opposed by a party from Waka's pa, in which case fighting would take place. I, however, got permission to proceed, and passed Heke's men a short distance from his camp, who were proceeding very cautiously along the native path, which was lined on either side with tolerably high fern and manuka. Cantering on some mile further, I met another party of Heke's men, headed by Hiratepuri, walking briskly back. They told me to be careful, as they were being followed by some of Waka's men. I had not proceeded much beyond musket shot, when I met Wirepa and party, following up Hira. I told them I was a messenger from Broughton and Ruhe to Waka, and asked them to return to the camp and hear what I had to say. Repa replied, "You will find Waka a little further on. Leave us to Takaro (play) a little," and on they went. I found Waka sitting by the side of the path, a little distance from where they were erecting their pah, with his wife sitting by his side, Waka with a double-barrelled gun in his hand, and she with a long-handled tomahawk. I had scarcely begun to deliver my message, when we heard firing. Waka jumped up, saying, "It's too late," and followed by his wife, he hastened after the party. 100 or more natives, armed, rushed from the camp, and in a very short time, skirmishing became general over a good part of the plain towards the lake. Finding myself in an unenviable position, I mounted my horse and rode to an eminence some 1/4 of a mile distant, where I had a tolerably clear view of what was going on, and could occasionally hear a spent shot from Heke's side dropping somewhere in my neighbourhood. The skirmishing lasted about an hour, for there was no close fighting, after which, as if by mutual consent, they ceased firing, and one of Waka's men called out lustily to me to pass on quickly. In riding along the narrow path, I saw several of the skirmishing party crouching in the scrub, who saluted me with a grin, and told me to clear out of the way. I had not reached Heke's camp when firing recommenced, and skirmishing was kept up, chiefly by the young men, for some 2 hours. Saw Heke, to whom I related my interview with Waka. He replied, "Well, if he will fight, let it be so." But he was evidently sorry that hostilities had commenced. Stayed in the camp till all skirmishing had ceased, and the wounded on Heke's side were brought in. Only one had been killed, and 4 wounded, one of them mortally. He had no less than 5 gunshots in different parts of the body. This was the first time in my life I had examined and dressed wounds, and must confess to having felt a little nervous. In the evening rode down to the Kerikeri to see the last of my family before their leaving for Auckland. Friday, April 4th. Returned to the Waimate early, leaving Mr. Kemp to see Mrs. B. on board the North Star, which was lying at the mouth of the Kerikeri River. After breakfast rode on to Maui, found Heke had gone with a party to Ohio for ammunition. The native who was mortally wounded still living, but too weak to talk. Saturday, April 5th. No fighting today. Saw Heke and party busy enlarging and strengthening their pah. Was proceeding on to Okaihau when I met Mr. Davis coming into Maui with a message from Waka to Heke to say that if he broke up his party and moved out of the neighbourhood he would not follow him, but if he remained at Maui and his people approached his camp there would be fighting. Heke replied, "We are on our own land. Waka's people have burnt our houses, taken our food, and are now in possession of plantations belonging to us. Let him return to Hokianga." I found that in the skirmishing on Thursday there had been but 1 killed and 1 wounded on Waka's side. Sunday, April 6th. Services and school as usual, with as many as we could bring together, which consisted of those who were living in the settlement or in the immediate neighbourhood. Our native teacher, Anaru, held a prayer meeting with the people in the evening. Monday, April 7th. As Heke had asked me to go out and see him on Monday morning, I left after breakfast. He authorised me to say to Waka that he was prepared to disperse his people if he would first return to Hokianga. Waka replied, "I am on my own land. Here I mean to remain until I hear from the governor, unless Heke first removes from Maui." Heke is doubtless anxious to make peace with Waka, but his proud spirit will not allow him to yield to Waka's demand. On the other hand, Waka only awaits the governor's reply to his letter, in which he renewed his promise to His Excellency to assist him in punishing Heke for his misdeeds. Tuesday, April 8th. Rode out to Te Ahuahu, with the intention of going both to Heke's and Waka's camps, but had scarcely reached the hill when firing commenced in the plain below. This continued and extended a good way around the lake and over the plain near Heke's camp until about 3 o'clock p.m. I afterward went to the camp and found 4 wounded, 1 mortally, but none killed. I saw them all, and did what I could under the circumstances. Was on my way to Waka's camp when I met 2 natives coming to me for medicine for one of the 5 who had been wounded, 4 only slightly, none killed. The one who was dangerously wounded was a chief of Hokianga, greatly respected by his people. The ball had entered the side, passed under the ribs, and was lodged there. The report of the men was that he was vomiting a quantity of blood, and was suffering more especially from a difficulty of breathing and a choking sensation. I sent as quickly as possible a mild emetic, and also an aperient dose, with such instructions as my little medical knowledge would allow, and promised to follow the man early in the morning. Wednesday, April the 9th. Left home before daylight, but when about half-way, met a messenger to say that the emetic had produced a discharge of a large quantity of congealed blood, that the patient was so much better they had removed him towards Hokianga. Rode over to Heke's camp. Found them busy strengthening an old stockade, but Heke and the greater number of his men had commenced a new pah in the open space, some half a mile nearer to Waka's camp, on a piece of rising ground sloping westward towards the lake, and southwards towards Te Ahuahu. Waka's people were also strengthening their position. Thursday, Friday and Saturday, April the 10th, 11th and 12th. Both parties engaged erecting and strengthening their pahs. Today, Saturday, a few young men from Waka's camp came over within half a mile of where Heke's people are building their new pah, and fired a few shots, with a view to bring on skirmishing, but as they met with no response, they returned. Sunday, April the 13th. Rather a large congregation of natives this morning, as a number of Heke's people walked in from Maui and returned after the service. The English congregation reduced to 8. Monday, April the 14th. Rode out to Heke's pah. Found he had gone to Tayamai, but had given instructions that no one should for the future be allowed to pass through his camp to Waka's, as he had been informed that 2 young men, one of them in government employ, who had been allowed to do so, had brought from Waka a sample of gunpowder to show the government how bad it was, and also a letter to the governor asking for a supply of ammunition. As I had not in any way been a transgressor in this matter, I pleaded that I might be made an exception, but as I had no special object in going to Okaihau that day, I was content to wait Heke's return. Tuesday, April the 15th. Skirmishing again today. Went to both camps after the skirmishers had drawn in. Found 1 killed and 4 wounded on Heke's side, one of the 4 very severely, and 3 wounded of Waka's men. Wednesday, April the 16th. The majority of the natives who had come from Whangaroa to join Heke passed through the Waimate this morning on their way home. I congratulated them on their decision to draw out of the quarrel. They replied, "We only came up to please Rewarewa. We had nothing to do with sacking Kororareka. We are related, some to Heke and some to Waka. Why should we endanger our lives in this quarrel?" I found that in the skirmish the day before, some of these men had gone out with Heke's party, and some with Waka's. Rewarewa, who is an old man, and one of the most influential chiefs of Whangaroa, told me that his sympathies were with Heke, because he believed Waka had not taken up the quarrel on account of the government, but to revenge a grudge he had against Heke. I replied that although I did not agree with him in that, I considered he was acting wisely in withdrawing his men. Thursday, April the 17th. Some of Heke's party foraging about the settlement very early this morning. Our own natives had suspected their intentions, and had been on the watch from dawn of day. Nothing was missing, but as they were disposed to hang about the station, I had to request them to return to their own places, which they did. Friday, April the 18th. All quiet today, each party strengthening their position. Saturday, April the 19th. Very sharp skirmishing today, lasting 3 or 4 hours. One of HEKE'S men killed, 17, more or less, wounded, some severely. Of Waka's, 1 killed and 3 wounded. Was out at HEKE'S camp, but it was too late to go on to Okaihau. Some 2 or 3 of HEKE'S wounded men are not likely to recover. Sunday, April the 20th. A small congregation this morning. Many of our people who have still some of their food at their plantations are out trying to prevent HEKE'S men, who are gathering in all the supplies they can possibly get, from robbing them. A native came in from HEKE'S camp this afternoon, who informed me that of the natives who were wounded on Saturday, 2 had died. Old Anaru, our native teacher, had been with them. Monday, April the 21st. Rode out to HEKE'S camp to see the wounded. Found that all who could be moved, and were of no use in the camp, had been taken away by their friends. In fact, 2 or 3 of those wounded on HEKE'S side were relatives of natives fighting with Waka's people, and had been handed over to his party. A prophet has arisen among us, and 2 or 3 of my natives came to me this evening to relate a vision which he had had, the substance of which was that Kawiti was coming this night to kill us all and burn the station, and as he was encamped at Paheke, on his way to join Heke, the story had taken fast hold upon the people, who proposed to mount guard, some at my house and some in the house below. I raised no objection, and before I went to bed, about 20 men, duly armed, were in my verandah, some rolled up in their blankets, and some on guard. Tuesday, April the 22nd. When I made my appearance in the morning, my bodyguard came round me to know if I had slept at all. They were surprised when I told them I had had a good night's rest. They said that they had not had any sleep, and expressed themselves very confident that had they not been on the watch the houses would have been destroyed. Was out among the belligerents. Some of Waka's young men approached HEKE'S camp with a view to draw them out for a skirmish, but the men continued at their work, strengthening their fortification. The natives immediately around our settlement, who have hitherto remained at home, looking after their food, etc., are becoming alarmed at HEKE'S people, who are every day making their appearance among them, seeking for prey. Wednesday and Thursday, April the 23rd and 24th. Yesterday and today, negotiations have been going on between Waka and Heke through some influential chiefs. Waka proposes that Heke shall clear out altogether from the district, take all the natives with him who took any part in the destruction of Kororareka, and locate himself farther inland, either at Hikorangi or beyond Ruapekapeka. If he will agree to this, Waka will return to Hokianga and leave the whole of the Waimate and the Lake District clear. Heke does not accept this proposition, but replies, "We are on our own land, where we mean to remain until we are driven off." Friday, April the 25th. The wind being from the westward, we could hear distinctly the firing from the direction of the camps. We knew, therefore, that skirmishing was going on. Rode out towards Mawe, but firing ceased before I arrived there, and as far as I could learn, there were no casualties on either side. Saturday, April the 26th. All quiet today. HEKE'S people hard at work at their pa. Sunday, April the 27th. The usual native services. We have no English among us. Some 50 natives came in from Te Ahuahu, making our morning congregation about 150. The people were more than ordinarily attentive today. They are feeling the critical state they are in as neutrals. Our native teacher was out holding service with HEKE'S people. On his return he reported to me that Heke had been addressing the people, comparing themselves to the persecuted children of Israel, etc. Monday, April the 28th. After our usual morning school, and just as the people were dispersing, a messenger arrived from Paihia with letters. Heard of the safe arrival of our families in Auckland. About 4 p.m. we heard the report of guns, which proved to be those of HMS North Star, which was just entering the bay, followed by 2 transports bringing some 300 soldiers and 40 volunteers. Tuesday, April the 29th. Some of HEKE'S natives were about the settlement very early this morning, with a view to plunder, we presume. Skirmishing today. Some 3 or 4 wounded on each side, but none killed. HEKE sent a messenger to some of the men who are neutral and living on the station to persuade them to join him now that soldiers are at hand, as they would have to leave the Waimate to make room for the troops. I reassured them that, even should the troops come to the Waimate, I should be able to take care of them, as the governor had issued a proclamation to the effect that all natives who had not taken up arms against the government would be protected. Wednesday, April the 30th. Saw Heke this morning, my chief object being to ascertain his views and feelings now that soldiers are actually in the bay. He was very civil, but said he meant to wait the results. He had heard that Waka with a part of his men had gone down to welcome the troops and to show them the way inland. He should watch their movements, but not go away. Thursday, May the 1st. Very early this morning Heke made his appearance on the borders of the settlement, with about 100 men and a number of dogs. Hearing of their approach, I met them at the west end of the station. They formed in line and rushed towards me, yelling as if about to dance the war dance. This demonstration was intended more for the people who were with me than for myself. He told me they had come in to catch some of the pigs which were running about in the scrub near at hand, that they might have a supply of pork in their paars. To my reply that I hoped they would save ours, he said, "If you will give us the earmark of yours, I will do my best to save them, but we shall not be particular with the kupapas." A kupapa is one who is sitting still, taking no part with either side. Heke said, moreover, "My people are wishing to destroy the bridge over the Waitanga, to prevent the soldiers bringing their guns, etc. into the Waimate." My answer was that it was very uncertain as to whether the troops would want the bridge at all, for if Waka led them by the way he had gone out to fetch them, namely by the Keri direct to Okehau, they would not come near the bridge. Some of his men, however, were very eager to destroy it, but after pointing out to them that we who lived on the Waimate side would be the chief sufferers under any circumstances by its destruction, they gave up the idea and went off to pig hunt. In the afternoon the whole body returned, having caught some 50 or 60 pigs of various sizes. Just as Heke was leaving with his party, a native from the bay rode up to him and told him that Pomare had been taken prisoner in his pa by the captain of the North Star, sent on board, and his pa burnt. Heke turned to me and said, "Davis and you must be a payment for Pomare." The idea of Mr. Davis and I being prisoners in Heke's pa appeared so novel that I laughed heartily, and Heke joined in the laugh. I told him I believed Pomare would be all safe with the captain. It was known that some of Pomare's people had partaken in the spoils from Kororareka, but as they had done so without their chief's knowledge, he would not be held responsible. Friday, May the 2nd. One of the CMS horses is missing from the paddock, with 2 or 3 others belonging to our natives. We fear they were taken last night. Hearing of Pomare having been taken prisoner, I sent a messenger late last night on horseback to bring in the correct news. Found the information was true. Sir E. Hume surrounded the pa early yesterday morning with some of his sailors. Nearly all Pomare's natives who were in the pa managed to get away, but Pomare himself made no attempt to leave, and as the captain's object was simply to get him out of harm's way for a time, he did not attempt the capture of any of his men. My messenger also brought a note written to Ruhe at Pomare's request, asking him to send a message to Heke to say that he wished no notice to be taken of his imprisonment on board the North Star, where he was being well fed and kindly treated. In the still of the evening, as I was walking my veranda, grieving over the sad effects this war was having upon our work as missionaries, my attention was called to the sound of voices at a distance. and on approaching the spot from whence the sound came, I discovered that 4 or 5 of our Christian natives, among them my own teacher, were holding a prayer meeting to invoke God's help in this season of excitement and danger. End of Part 3.